In the long history of Middle-earth, no single decision has altered its fate more profoundly than one made at the peak of Mount Doom at the close of the Second Age. As the chaos of battle subsided and victory seemed assured, a king stood at a crossroads, holding in his hand the power to end darkness forever, or to ensure its inevitable return. Most readers of Tolkien's epic know the broad strokes of this tale. Isildur cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand, but failed to destroy it. Yet beneath this simple narrative lies a complex tragedy, one of pride, weakness, fate, and a burden that would plague Middle-earth for 3,000 years. What drove this legendary king to make such a catastrophic decision? Was it mere greed, as some tales suggest, or something far more human and complex? And how did this single moment of weakness darken countless lives across millennia, ultimately requiring his distant heir to rectify what he had lost? The answers reveal not just a footnote in Middle-earth's history, but the pivotal moment upon which all of Tolkien's epic hinges, a moment when a hero's triumph became Middle-earth's doom. This is the true curse of Isildur, a burden heavier than any crown and a stain that even time could not erase. Isildur was no common king, but a figure of extraordinary nobility and courage, descended from the great Numenorian line. As Elendil's eldest son, the High King of Gondor and Arnor, he inherited not just royal blood, but a legacy of resistance against darkness. By the final centuries of the Second Age, Numenor had fallen deeply under Sauron's influence. King Ar-Pharazôn, the last and most prideful ruler of Numenor, had originally brought Sauron back as a captive. Through cunning manipulation, the Dark Lord quickly turned this humiliation to advantage, becoming the king's most trusted advisor and corrupting the Numenorians from within. Under his poisonous guidance, the people abandoned their worship of the Valar and began worshipping Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. Among Sauron's calculated acts was his plan to destroy Nimloth, the White Tree of Numenor, a direct descendant of Telperion, one of the two trees of Valinor whose light had illuminated the world before the sun and moon. The White Tree stood as the living symbol of the Numenorians' connection to the Valar and the West. Its destruction would represent not merely a political shift, it would mark the kingdom's complete spiritual surrender to darkness. When Isildur learned of this plan, he recognized what was at stake. Beyond a simple tree, this was the very soul of his people. With a profound sense of duty to his heritage, he took action when others cowered in fear. Infiltrating the heavily guarded royal court of Armenelos alone, disguised with Sauron himself potentially nearby, was an act of almost suicidal bravery. Isildur was caught by the guards and gravely wounded while escaping. Despite his injuries, Isildur held on to the fruit, refusing to let it be lost. After his escape, Isildur lay near death for weeks. The Silmarillion notes that his wounds took long to heal, and he bore the scars to the end of his days. Shortly after Isildur's daring rescue, Sauron convinced Ar-Pharazôn to cut down Nimloth, ensuring the original tree was destroyed. But from the fruit Isildur had saved, a seedling grew, which was later carried to Middle-earth when Numenor fell. This sapling would become the White Tree of Gondor, the very same lineage that Aragorn would eventually restore at the end of The Lord of the Rings, 3,000 years later. This deed reveals much about Isildur's character, his willingness to risk everything for what he believed right, his courage against overwhelming odds, and his commitment to preserving the sacred heritage of his people. These were not the qualities of a man easily corrupted, but they perhaps hint at the complex pride that would later make him vulnerable to the ring's influence, the same determination to claim and preserve what he believed rightfully his. When Numenor was destroyed by divine wrath, Isildur escaped with his father Elendil and brother Anarion to Middle-earth. There they established the kingdoms of Arnor in the north and Gondor in the south, realms in exile for the surviving Numenorians. While Elendil ruled as High King, Isildur and Anarion jointly governed Gondor, building the great cities of Minas Ithil and Minas Anor. But the shadow of Sauron grew once more in Mordor, and eventually the last alliance of elves and men was formed to oppose him. This war, spanning 7 long years, would be the greatest military campaign of the age. Isildur fought valiantly alongside his father, his brother Anarion, and their elven allies led by Gil-galad. The alliance pushed back the forces of darkness to the Black Gate and beyond, finally cornering Sauron within his fortress of Barad-dûr. The final confrontation came on the slopes of Mount Doom itself. It was in this moment of desperation that Isildur performed the deed that would be inscribed in the chronicles of history. As Tolkien recounts, "But at the last, the siege was so strait that Sauron himself came forth, and he wrestled with Gil-galad and Elendil, and they both were slain, and the sword of Elendil broke under him as he fell. But Sauron also was thrown down, and with the hilt shard of Narsil, Isildur cut the ruling ring from the hand of Sauron and took it for his own." This single act brought down the Dark Lord, scattering his physical form and sending his armies fleeing in disarray. Victory, bought with the blood of thousands, was finally achieved. Standing at the cracks of doom where the ring was forged, Isildur was urged by Elrond and Círdan to destroy it. They alone understood the true nature of the ring. It was not merely a weapon or a token of power, but a vessel containing much of Sauron's own malice. But Isildur refused. Instead, he claimed it as a were-guild for the deaths of his father and brother, and an heirloom for his house. This was just the beginning of the ring's slow corruption. Upon leaving Mount Doom with the ring in his possession, Isildur documented his experience with it in writing. The scroll that survived, later would be known as the Scroll of Isildur, provides a chilling first-hand account of the ring's immediate effect on its new bearer. More tellingly, Isildur says, "It was hot when I first took it, hot as a gleeder, and my hand was scorched, so that I doubt if ever again I shall be free of the pain of it. Yet even as I write, it is cooled, and it seemeth to shrink, though it loseth neither its beauty nor its shape. Already the writing upon it, which at first was as clear as red flame, fadeth, and is now only barely to be read. It is fashioned in an elven script of Eireg Eon, for they have no letters in Mordor for such subtle work. But the language is unknown to me. I deem it to be a tongue of the Black Land, since it is foul and uncouth. What evil it saith I do not know, but I trace here a copy of it, lest it fade beyond recall. The ring misseth maybe the heat of Sauron's hand, which was black and yet burned like fire, and so Gil-galad was destroyed, and maybe were the gold made hot again, the writing would be refreshed. But for my part I will risk no hurt to this thing. Of all the works of Sauron, the only fair, it is precious to me, though I buy it with great pain." This passage reveals the ring's insidious method of corruption. Despite being physically burned by it, Isildur focuses on its beauty and shape. Though he recognizes the inscription as being in the black speech of Mordor, explicitly describing it as foul and uncouth, he still treasures the ring enough to preserve its inscription and plan for its future as an heirloom. Most telling is his final declaration, "It is precious to me," echoing the very words that would later consume Gollum's mind. What makes this corruption so pernicious is that Isildur was uniquely positioned to understand the ring's danger. He had witnessed firsthand Sauron's manipulation of Numenor, had fought against the Dark Lord for 7 years, and had seen the ring's power manifest in battle. Yet in the crucial moment, all this knowledge failed him. The ring's corruption worked not by turning him to evil, but by enhancing the pride and sense of entitlement already present within him. The same determination that had led him to risk his life to save the White Tree of Numenor now twisted into a possessive need to claim and keep what he saw as rightfully his. This pattern of corruption, the subtle warping of noble intentions into selfish actions, would repeat throughout the history of the ring. Gollum's initial fascination with the birthday present, Bilbo's harmless lie about how he acquired it, Boromir's conviction that using the ring against Sauron was the only path to victory, they all mirror Isildur's original justification. The ring never turned its bearers instantly evil. Rather, it identified their deepest desires and most cherished values, then twisted them into paths of self-destruction. After Sauron's defeat, Isildur did not immediately return to his kingdom in the north. Instead, he remained in Gondor for a time, establishing order, planting the seedling of the White Tree in Minas Anor, and setting his nephew Meneldyl as ruler of the South Kingdom. It was only after these that Isildur finally set his sights northward, toward his own kingdom of Arnor. On the 30th day of September in the year 2 of the Third Age, just 2 years after Sauron's defeat, Isildur departed from Minas Anor with a modest company of 200 men. His 3 eldest sons, Elendur, Aratan, and Sirion, traveled with him while his youngest son, Valandil, remained in the safety of Rivendell, too young for the rigors of travel. Despite warnings about the dangers that still lurked in the wild lands between Gondor and Arnor, Isildur chose a direct route, following the eastern side of the Anduin. It was here on the evening of October 4th, in the shadow of the Misty Mountains, that his camp was surrounded and attacked by a large force of orcs. They were remnants of Sauron's armies who had fled north after their master's defeat. The attack was no random encounter. As Tolkien notes, these orcs had been drawn by the ring of power that was upon Isildur, but concealed from all others. The ambush was devastating. Though Isildur's men were Numenorians, veterans of the War of the Last Alliance, they were vastly outnumbered and taken by surprise. The ensuing battle was brief and brutal. The orcs, driven by a mindless hatred of the Dunedain and perhaps an unconscious pull toward the ring, fell upon Isildur's company with savage ferocity. As the tide of battle turned against them, Elendur, Isildur's eldest son and heir, urged his father to flee, knowing that the survival of the ring-bearer was more critical than any individual warrior. "Go, take your burden, and at all costs bring it to the keepers, even at the cost of abandoning your men and me." In this moment, we see a reversal of the typical heroic narrative. Rather than the son being saved by the father's sacrifice, it is the father who is urged to flee while his sons stand and die. More telling still is Elendur's reference to the ring as Isildur's burden, a stark contrast to Isildur's earlier view of it as a prized heirloom and rightful weregild. Perhaps in the face of death, with the ring's power drawing enemies to them, Elendur recognized what his father could not, that the ring was no treasure, but a curse. Reluctantly, Isildur heeded his son's final counsel. He placed the ring upon his finger, vanishing from sight, the first recorded instance of him using its power of invisibility. Yet, even as he fled through the darkness, the very artifact he sought to save betrayed him. The ring slipped from his finger as he swam, and then the orcs saw him as he labored in the stream, and they shot him with many arrows. And that was his end. Here we find the cruel irony at the heart of Isildur's doom. The ring, which he had claimed as compensation for his father's death, ultimately led him to a similar fate. In the moment of greatest need, it abandoned him to the enemies it had drawn to him, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in the waters of the Anduin. Even more tragically, his death accomplished what his life had not. The ring was lost in the river, disappearing from knowledge for nearly 2,500 years. In this way, the ring that Isildur had refused to cast into the fires of Mount Doom found another way to escape destruction, continuing its long journey back to its master. While Isildur's failure to destroy the ring stands as his most consequential action, another legacy of his remained potent throughout the Third Age, his curse upon the men of the White Mountains, known in later years as the Dead Men of Dunharrow or the Oathbreakers. The origins of this curse reach back to the days before the Last Alliance. The men of the mountains were a pre-Numenorian people related to the Dunlendings and the folk of Haleth. They had inhabited the White Mountains during the Second Age, long before the arrival of the Numenorians. Most crucially, they had worshipped Sauron during the Dark Years before Gondor's foundation. After Gondor was established in the closing years of the Second Age, the king of these mountain folk swore a solemn oath to Isildur at the Stone of Eric. This mysterious black stone, said to have been brought from Numenor itself, became the site of a binding covenant. When Isildur summoned them to join the last alliance against their former master, fear or lingering loyalty to Sauron led them to break their oath. In his wrath, he pronounced judgment upon them, "Thou shalt be the last king. And if the West prove mightier than thy black master, this curse I lay upon thee and thy folk, to rest never until your oath is fulfilled. For this war will last through years uncounted, and you shall be summoned once again ere the end." The men of the mountains fled from Isildur's wrath, hiding in secret places throughout the mountain range. Cut off from contact with other men, they slowly dwindled and faded, but death brought them no release from Isildur's curse. Their spirits remained bound to the physical world, unable to depart beyond the circles of the world like other mortals. The wraiths of these sleepless dead spread terror around the hill of Eric and all places where the men of the mountains had once dwelled. They haunted the caverns beneath the Dwemerberg mountain, and their spectral forms appeared in the valley of Harrowdale during times of trouble or impending death. What makes this curse particularly fascinating is the contrast it presents to Isildur's own actions at Mount Doom. The man who could not fulfill his duty to destroy the ring showed no mercy to others who failed in their obligations. This contradiction reveals the complex nature of Isildur's character, capable of great courage and terrible judgment, of righteous fury and fatal weakness. That he could condemn others to an eternal punishment for the very failing he himself had succumbed to speaks to the tragic blindness that often accompanies power. Yet Isildur's prophetic curse contained within it the seeds of its own resolution. His words, "You shall be summoned once again ere the end," foretold that the oathbreakers would have a chance to redeem themselves, to fulfill their ancient pledge, and find the release that had been denied them for 3 millennia. This opportunity would come during the War of the Ring, when Aragorn, Isildur's heir, called upon the dead to fulfill their oath by fighting against Sauron's forces. As the rightful heir to Isildur, only Aragorn had the authority to release the dead from their curse. When he descended into the paths of the dead, he addressed their spectral king with words that directly echoed and answered Isildur's ancient curse. "The hour is come at last. Now I go to Pelargir upon Anduin, and ye shall come after me. And when all this land is clean of the servants of Sauron, I will hold the oath fulfilled, and ye shall have peace and depart forever." After the Battle of Pelargir, with Sauron's forces defeated, Aragorn declared their oath fulfilled, and the ancient curse was lifted. The shadows that had haunted the White Mountains for 3,000 years were finally released, allowed to pass beyond the circles of the world to whatever fate awaited them. Though Sauron's physical form was destroyed and his power greatly diminished at the end of the Second Age, his spirit remained tethered to Middle-earth through the ring's continued existence. This incomplete victory transformed what should have been an age of peace into one of vigilance against an inevitable return of darkness. For Isildur's own descendants, the consequences manifested immediately. With his death at the Gladden Fields, the unified realm he and his father had established fractured. His only surviving son, Valandil, inherited a northern kingdom already diminished by the loss of its founder and many of its greatest warriors. Meanwhile, the southern kingdom of Gondor passed to the line of Anarion under Meneldel's rule. What should have been a single great realm of the Dunedain instead became 2 separate kingdoms, neither achieving the strength they might have possessed united. As the Third Age progressed, Arnor, Isildur's direct inheritance, splintered further into the rival kingdoms of Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur. These divisions left the northern Dunedain vulnerable to the Witch King of Angmar, who systematically destroyed these realms over generations of conflict. By the time of the War of the Ring, Arnor existed only in ruins, its people reduced to the wandering rangers, its royal line preserved in secret through Aragorn's ancestors. Beyond political fragmentation, Isildur's heirs inherited a profound symbolic burden. The shards of Narsil, which had cut the ring from Sauron's hand, were preserved in Rivendell not merely as relics, but as reminders of unfinished business. The broken sword represented both the triumph of cutting the ring from Sauron's hand and the failure to complete the task by destroying it. Its eventual reforging would signify Isildur's heir finally correcting his ancestors' mistake. Even more profound were the consequences for ordinary people throughout Middle-earth. The continued threat of Sauron meant countless conflicts that would never have occurred had the ring been destroyed. The realm of Khazad-dûm fell not just to the Balrog, but to the subsequent Orcish invasions that flourished under Sauron's distant influence. The northern kingdom suffered through the long winter, a catastrophe many believed was engineered by the Witch King. Greenwood the Great became Mirkwood as Sauron, disguised as the Necromancer, poisoned it from his stronghold at Dol Guldur. Even the peaceful Shire did not escape unscathed, as the year of scarcity brought suffering to a land otherwise untouched by the great conflicts of the age. Each of these tragedies can be traced back to that single moment when Isildur claimed the ring for his own. By the final centuries of the Third Age, the full weight of Isildur's decision had become painfully evident. The elves were fading, the dwarves driven from ancient homes, and the kingdoms of men in decline, Gondor diminished and Arnor lost. Against Saurion's resurgent power, conventional military victory seemed increasingly impossible. The tragic irony is that Isildur himself may have begun to understand his error before the end. In the Unfinished Tales, Tolkien suggests that Isildur was considering taking the ring to Rivendell, perhaps to seek counsel from Elrond about what to do with it. This hints at a dawning recognition of the burden he had assumed, though this realization came too late.